Welcome back to Last Turn. This is episode 5. I'm Bart, and joining today is my co-host, Evan. How are you doing today, Evan?
I am doing terribly.
Why are you doing so poorly?
Because I'm lying. And I'm actually great. Everything's wonderful. Played lots of
like
Hearthstone. Can't really get better than that.
That is pretty decent. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about today, Hearthstone, that game that we talk about.
That's a good idea for this episode. we should totally do that more often.
I think so too. So, why don't you introduce us here?
Yeah, last time we talked about Wild. We will, I guess, switch it up a little bit, talk about Standard. Sort of not a lot of changes as far as was maybe best and what's the most popular. But definitely some gradual things. Definitely things to pay attention to. And sort of everything's coming closer to each other in power level. I think the main thing to take into consideration is that these decks are balancing out. I don't think there's really a big advantage in picking the right deck or the meta deck compared to playing a deck you know how to play well. There's a good deal of control showing up that hadn't been around. There's this big wave of aggro druid and pirates and decks playing crabs to beat those decks maybe 2 weeks ago, and not really that much control. But a slow increase in the amount of control decks that are packing ways to deal damage in an area to stop these token druids, but also Crystal Rogue to then beat those control decks.
So do you think that maybe the fact that some of the aggressive and proactive decks were teching against each other with crabs and tar creepers and stuff maybe enabled some of the control decks to come around and enact sort of longer term game plans where if these decks are filled with misses, the control decks could have been able to capitalize on the additional turns they'll accumulate over the course of many games from all of those miscards being drawn?
Yeah, and in fact, I think the first reaction to the appearance of all these aggressive decks with pirates and Murlocs was to just sort of play something similar with the hate cards, so the hate crabs. And gradually people have decided to, instead of using a different aggro deck as a solution with those crabs, actually playing a control deck. I think Crystal Rogue basically became less and less popular as these aggro decks were winning and being played a lot, and now that the pendulum's swinging back, Crystal Rogue is showing up more.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, there's basically less reason to play a Hungry Crab and a Galactic Crawler because there's less decks with Hungry Crabs and Galactic Crawlers. For example, like there's less Token Druid. There's also less Murloc Paladin. And both of those decks theoretically could run 2 copies of each.
Sure.
And I believe that the amount of Pirate Warrior is about the same. The amount of Control Warrior, if you umbrella anything that really isn't Pirate Warrior under that heading, anything that's playing a slow game, is probably about the same, but I'm seeing less Quest, and actually sort of people trying to break away from playing the Quest if they're playing break away from playing the Quest if they're playing Control Warrior, and actually like maybe still playing Bloodhoof Braves and Alley Armorsmiths because they're good, but also playing like N'Zoth and 2 Direhorn Hatchlings, or just playing like actual sort of classic Fatigue Warrior, because Crystal Rogue really had sort of been diminished a lot by all these aggro decks. Nothing really exciting otherwise with Warrior.
That's interesting though. So I think that another thing that might have enabled Control Warrior coming back is that Burn and Secret Mage or specifically Burn Mage, and to a lesser extent Freeze Mage, are popular and strong picks on the ladder, and they have been for a very long time. So on VS, some mage deck has been represented in the top 2 most prevalent decks for a very long time, or top 3. And I think that, control warrior that is just slamming its hero power as often as it can has a natural advantage against these decks because its hero power is very close to drawing card or part of a card. So that might have enabled that deck, in addition to just having a strong game in its taunts against the aggressive decks and not really needing the taunt in that matchup and not really needing the quest in either the aggressive matchups or the mage matchup. Could have just made it so that you don't really need it in your deck. You don't need to build around it.
Yeah, it also it's possible that people could have been looking at it that way earlier.
Right.
And it just sort of was so counterintuitive that no one was doing it. But I completely agree. I'm looking at VS right now. One of the classes that's just been consistently going up in popularity is Mage.
Sure.
And Control Warrior is going to have an advantage against pretty much all of the Mage decks, whether it's Burn, Freeze, or Secret. Some more than others. But it's pretty much going to have a good game against all of them.
Yeah, of course. Armor Up is really good.
It's hero power, like you said, is just so much value against their plans. Really, so Quest Mage would be good against it. That's the only one I can think of. All the other ones, their value is very much how much damage they can do. And then Quest Mage is actually going to just not be that way. And Quest Mage would have a great game against the Control Warrior.
Yeah, and a terrible game against everything else.
Yeah. But the higher rate of Mage is definitely what made Warrior more confident in control and just armoring up and not needing to have a Sulfurous. And that has helped Crystal Rogue show up more, as well as more Jade Druid.
Right.
Yeah, so Druid is roughly as played as it was a week or two ago, but it's shifted less token and more Jade. And Crystal Rogue also tends to just crush Jade Druid.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Jade is sort of the control deck that counters other control decks. If Crystal Rogue gives Hearthstone a floor, then Jade gives it a ceiling. That deck can go over basically any other deck. It was actually pretty popular in the global games. A lot of teams are opting to bring that instead of tokens. I don't know exactly what the representation is, but definitely seeing lots of Jades and a lot of tokens. Maybe Jade's even more common. I'm not sure.
The Jade definitely really likes seeing all the mages. Once again, we were talking about the armor advantage that a warrior's going to have against a mage, and Jade Druid sort of also, I think, the main mage decks that were showing up more now are good against Token Druid and bad against Jade Druid. And sure enough, Jade Druid showing up more, Token Druid showing up less.
Sure. That's interesting.
Warlock is basically irrelevant still.
Still not a class. Sorry, Gildan.
Yes, it's all very interesting and dynamic, and it's like a whole web of interesting stuff, and then Warlock is just over there, completely uninteracting.
Well, it's a deck in Wild, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's remarkable how balanced all of the strong decks are. I think it's one of this. If I had to make a list of Tier 1 decks, I'd have a lot of trouble right now.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Compared to, like, a month ago. I feel like, the strength of Pirates over the Tier 2 and Tier 3 decks was much greater than it is now. There's a lot more... Almost every deck has at least one other deck that if you bump into it, you're like, crap. I have almost no shot here, even if you're Pirates, and I don't think that had been the case. Also, Shaman. I think that's the main deck that really spiked in popularity recently.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Control Priest definitely got some support. But yeah, this Shaman deck is proving to be really strong. It was being played a lot in Legendary rank and also just climbing to Legendary frequently compared to other classes.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I had explained to you a few days ago that when I picked up the list, I assumed that it was just some sort of, rush beatdown deck and try to Bloodlust on curve and crush your opponents. It's totally, absolutely not that. It's a lot more analogous to how it feels to play the mid-range Paladin deck, where you just threaten Tarim, and this deck is just threatening Bloodlust by slamming its hero power and putting something on the board, and then playing a Firefly and playing out the other little token, and just trying to build up a board of more or less inconsequential minions, but constantly threaten Bloodlust and force your opponent to blow resources on your board until you eventually have it, and they don't have it.
In that sense, it's very combo-y. And you're also always looking for opportunities to use Flame Tongue Totem against them to get great advantage.
Oh, yeah.
Some lists also just use Evolve. There's a lot more longevity than it seems like there would be because of Stonehill Defender.
Yeah,
and
sure.
how powerful the cards you can get off of him are, like Thing from Below, Alakir.
Jade's help with longevity as well.
Yes, that's another thing. Very often you want an Aya in your deck, and 2 Jade Lightning, and 2 Jade Claws. Those cards are insane. So you wind up pumping out quite large minions that your opponent now has to deal with this 4/4, this 5/5, in addition to the fact that you have this whole other board. So that the fact that scales so well for you is good, and you have this sort of army of taunters to protect your Manatides and Primal Fins. The synergy of the Tar Creepers and the Stonehill Defenders with those totems and Flame Tongue also, I think is easy to not see when you just look at the deck list, but in practice it's really powerful.
Sure.
Having a Tar Creeper next to a Manatide, especially against a deck that, like Crystal Rogue, for example, its only way to get to the Manatide would be to smack it with minions. That's really gonna hurt them. And that also contributes to how frequently you get to execute this plan of play Bloodlust with a bunch of guys out.
Yeah.
If you frequently draw twice as many cards as you're supposed to, you get to do that a lot more often.
Yeah, it's nice because that's a deck that can really punish that deck could really punish the opponent for not having a way to deal with the board. And cards like Manatide Totem just soak up the single target removal, and that's really valuable. Obviously, if you want to sort of stick stuff on the board and untap with it. And obviously, it just draws you a card. I mean, at the very least, you're going to draw one card out of it and hopefully get one of their spells.
It can never be zero value.
Yeah, totally. It's at worst a cycler, and that's a fine place to be at worst.
And one of the strengths of your deck is how good you are at clearing their board. So you can frequently be playing a Manatide into an empty field.
Yeah, totally.
You have Maelstrom Portal, one of the biggest swingy things right now, to make it such that they have nothing and you have at least something. And that helps you defend your Manatides. And Primal Fin is a really strong card. I totally underestimated Primal Fin Totem when I was first looking at Angoro, but that's a strong card.
Yeah.
And another totem to go with Thing from Below as well.
It's the synergy with that and Flame Tongue Totem is pretty obvious, but this is a shell that really abuses that kind of card, where it really just does not care what minions it has on the board. It just wants a minion, and that one gives it exactly that. It's almost as threatening as the Manatide Totem, situationally.
Situationally it's more threatening.
And that's so awesome. I mean, that advances the deck's game plan. Just being able to force your opponent to waste time on every single one of your minions can buy you so much time to draw the cards that can put you into the late game, like the Jade Synergies or Doppelgangster Revolver, or just Bloodlust. That's so good.
Yes. Plus, a lot of those things can potentially even get you health if the only way you lose is to something like over-the-top damage, like from a mage or from a Pirate Warrior getting a Mortal Strike or something like that.
Right.
And your taunts don't matter. You can still... there's still ways for you to maybe recover health or get extra taunts off of Evolve effects or the Discover on Stonehill Defender. You can get that 2/4 that heals you.
Right.
there's a few. It's got a little bit of reach in those ways. I've also, when I was playing it, I was using a Ginny water speaker for the same reason, just to get extra resistance to those decks that try to go over the top. And a 3/6 body that will stick around is what you want with Bloodlust.
Totally.
Something that will actually get to smackle them that they'll underestimate. So you just have this deck that is great at clearing their board, very good at building its own board, that just beats almost every other aggro deck for the most part. And gives it a really good fight against pirates as well, which is normally tough to come by.
Sure.
And also you can just completely punish a control deck by killing them really fast.
Yeah, that's great. The deck feels like it's nice and flexible and has a lot of versatility in its game plan, and those kinds of decks are inherently very powerful because you can sort of, craft your strategy over the course of the game to best respond to your opponents. And I mean, having a deck that is both an excellent shell for Firefly, but can also run a Jade package or, lean on a 6-mana play in Doppelgangster Evolve, it could do both of those things really well, and that's great. I mean, Firefly on its own is an amazing card. This deck just makes such good use of it.
Yeah, it's surprisingly consistent in that regard. Even though Doppelgangster Evolve sounds like it definitely wouldn't be.
Yeah.
All 30 cards together wind up being quite consistent.
Totally.
And one thing, though, the deck is extremely weak to Freeze Mage. And I think that's one reason why there also were a lot more Freeze Mages showing up in Legendary ladder.
Sense.
At least because there's also a lot more Shaman there.
Yeah, the deck doesn't really... the tokens list doesn't usually have healing in the main deck.
And it just, gets rocked by Frost Nova Doomsayer.
Oh, sure.
Or just Blizzard. The board freezing effects are just, completely devastating.
Yeah.
So the Freeze Mage is an extremely tough matchup. And then, also, you can hit some healing, or maybe you do have some healing main deck, but it's very rarely close to enough.
That's really interesting. It's also interesting that Crystal Rogue, like you had said, became pretty popular to prey on some of the other slower decks. I remember seeing on VS maybe a week or two ago that Crystal Rogue was the most popular deck in the Legend ladder.
Yeah, it got very popular in Legendary.
And that's almost, unthinkable. That was a deck that a lot of people knew was very strong and obviously really oppressive when nobody was playing Toon decks in the beginning of the meta. But I think a lot of people started to write it off pretty quick. It was like one of the best rogue decks, maybe not the best, but it was definitely really good, and it was something you could prey on a particular type of deck. But, last month it wasn't well positioned when everybody was running token druids and token shaman was just starting to come out. Nobody was really getting greedy with control, and nobody was, even thinking about running jades or anything like that, except at maybe the highest levels of competition. It's just so fascinating that, the metagame slowed down to check some of the faster decks. Just if you operate a turn slower and you have a slightly stronger win condition, then maybe you can beat the faster matchups. But if you start going too slow, then Crystal Rogue can come and just smack you for it.
Yeah, it's just always right behind you, ready to catch you if you trip.
Totally.
And start to lag, or even just think you can take a moment to breathe.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I kind of like the role that it plays. I love control decks. I love slow control decks a lot. Those are fun to play. But
me too.
It's nice that there is a check to them, because the game can also be a little annoying if those are the only good decks.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting every game going to fatigue is a little bit much.
Or every deck playing Reno Jackson, needing to deal with 60 life every game.
Yeah, for sure.
That's sort of like Shahrazad. Do you know what card I'm talking about? This is a Magic card.
Oh, is that the one where you play a sub game within your game of Magic?
Yes.
Oh, that's a funny comparison.
Because that card got banned because it was so annoying.
Sure.
But you were able to play 4 copies of it in one deck.
Yeah, that's too much.
But it's sort of like what Reno Jackson does.
Oh wow! I never really thought about that. I mean, there are obvious differences, but that's a funny parallel.
And there's also a card in Unhinged that references it, called like Into the Dungeon, and it's essentially Shahrazad, but you have to play the subgame under the table.
Oh, that's great. They should have something like that for Hearthstone. You have to open like a different app and play your game in that app.
You have to go get a MacBook.
Yeah, you have to get a different computer. So something you brought up earlier that I think we can expand on a little bit is that a lot of the decks are pretty equal right now, and there are a lot of decks that are matched up well against the metagame, and the metagame is, it's filled with like a pretty diverse set of decks, all of which can win. So you're best off just picking the one that you're the best with. You're best off picking the most familiar one if you're trying to rank up, you're trying to do really well and win games.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Something you have time with, like, as everything gets closer, the 58% get down to 55, 53, 52. I think that's where we are now.
Right.
That is sort of like the dust settling. Like, it's the meta getting solved. It was sort of destined to happen. It's just we didn't know what it was going to look like when the dust cleared. But things are getting... It was just inevitable that things would get closer in power level. And so that means that picking the right deck or picking the wrong deck doesn't mean as much.
Right.
And being able to play your deck well, specifically against your opponent. So also knowing how good your cards are compared to theirs means more now. Because the deck that you pick means less. So playing a deck that you have experience with, that or even just a class that you play a lot, like your favorite class, the class you have the most wins with, or the deck that you have the most wins with, means you're gonna be less likely to make a mistake in these very various situations. There's lots of good decks, so you're gonna have to really know your cards well to know how to use them against all these different decks.
Yeah, I feel like that's a piece of advice that's almost hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
But it does warrant mentioning, because there is so much discussion of what the best decks are, and everybody wants
how to counter this deck and how to break the meta. Yeah, that winds up becoming the focus.
Right, but this is something that is super duper important. If you just have a lot of experience playing a particular class or a particular deck type or something, oftentimes you're just going to do better, even if that has a comparatively low win rate. You're just going to do better playing that type of deck. And granted, maybe that's not the best way to get better at the game, but it's certainly a way to rank up.
And it's not like it'll make you worse.
It won't make you worse, yeah, definitely. I mean, you will learn something about other decks because you'll play against them.
And that might be one of the better, when the meta's so diverse, and there's even so many different ways to build the individual decks. Like, you could build Control Priest or Crystal Rogue many different ways at this point. One of the easier ways to maybe learn about those other decks that you're not familiar with would be by just playing a deck you're familiar with against them. You'll be able to learn about how you lose to them and how you beat them, and from the perspective of your deck that you know. And that might actually be more illuminating than looking at a hand of cards you've never played with before and going from there.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is also interesting that you can learn more about the deck not by playing it, by playing against it. And that's just another reason why playing a deck or class you're familiar with is a really good call right now. There's still going to continue to be people trying new decks they haven't played, or class they haven't played, because they can't win with anything. They're trying to find the thing that makes them win. They're trying to find the right deck. And as a result, they're going further and further out of their comfort zone. So people are more likely to make sort of simple mistakes, or even overthink things and play themselves, if you will.
Yeah, sure.
And you are going to be so much more prepared to take advantage of that and notice that they're making a mistake. And know that you can take advantage of it if you're playing a deck that you're familiar with.
Yeah, totally.
You might miss that what they did was a blunder because you don't realize they just made your game plan so much easier to pull off because you don't properly understand your game plan.
Yeah, I think that's something that comes to.
Like, they could, like, play a Dragonfire potion that kills all your minions, but if you're playing a deck you're not familiar with, like, and you had Igneous Elemental out and you're playing Crystal Rogue, that might have been exactly what you needed. And that might have just set you up in some way that, without experience, you just miss it. Whereas, if you're playing a deck you're familiar with, you know when what they did is like, oh, they left my minion out and I just got the 6 mana. Spikered Steed, GG.
Yeah.
You're much more likely to be able to outplay them and bait them into those kinds of situations and get the value out of your cards when you know them better.
Yeah.
It means more right now.
I think that's also especially really important, and that effect is felt more when you're talking about wanting to play a control deck but maybe you don't have a lot of experience, or just a long game deck, because those decks tend to have a lot of different lines, and especially some of the singleton decks in Wild. These decks have, way more lines than the average deck because they have so much card diversity. Even if there's redundancy among their cards, they are different cards and they have different strengths and they're good in different situations. But, in a game like the Mirror, if you were playing, Reno Warlock and you kind of know what you're supposed to do against Pirate Warrior, you're supposed to draw your board clears and draw Reno Jackson on curve. But if you're playing against like an Azoth Priest or something, if they blow their Dragonfire potion and you can bait out their Light Bomb, maybe in 5 to 8 turns, you're gonna crush them with an Azoth, even if it's not in your hand. But if you've never played the deck, you might not think about that. Likewise, you might blow your Twisting Nether too early, and
get beat by their Azoth.
Right. It's important. It's important to know the lines of your deck, and I mean, it's hard to advise something in good faith where we say you should play a deck that you're familiar with, so you can avoid learning these lines. But hey, it depends on your goals. Depends on why you're playing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and there's always casual if you're really concerned about losing rank, or the rank 5 floor.
Yeah, the floor is actually really great for that.
It's fun to play on the floor.
Yeah, it's always fun to play on the floor.
Play it fast and loose on the floor.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, when I get to 5, I like to explore a little bit. That's nice. I mean,
even if
it ultimately, I think it's mostly psychological, but that's fine. We're all humans here.
Yeah, I mean, it's wrong to have fun playing a game. Is that the argument we're trying to defeat? I don't think we have to try too hard.
I agree. That's like the ultimate straw man.
But these when we talk about decks you're familiar with, playing them now is good.
So, I mean, another reason why that can be good is it's often possible to see the tech slots in the deck. So even if your deck is maybe not super duper matched up well against the meta, you might know what cards you could take out without breaking the deck. If such cards exist. Not every deck has tech slots. And
what would be appropriate to put in to be good against the meta? Like, if you play Paladin all the time, you're going to make that decision a lot more accurately about Paladin than if you're trying to fill the last 4 slots in this Quest Rogue deck you've never played, or this Control Priest deck you've never played. Even if it says it's got this good win rate, that is probably not worth it right now.
Right.
It's probably more worth it for learning the deck and less worth it for ranking up. Not that it wouldn't be worth doing, just...
Of course. There's time and place.
Yeah. And it's...
Especially as we're nearing the end of the season, I guess, now is probably not the time to try to learn a new deck if you're trying to push Legend, or you're trying to eke out your last ranks on the Legend ladder or something. You might just be better off trying to tech out your most powerful deck. I mean, I have told the story in the past of the Things from Below and the Aggro Shaman. That was something that worked for me. There's tons of examples of these tech decisions. Rallying Blade and Midrange Paladin was one from last season that was really good. These sorts of decisions can take advantage of the fact that your opponent thinks they know your deck list, and they can also just make you can take advantage of playing a familiar strategy, but gain leverage where your deck is typically weak, and that's just something really strong in general. You should always be looking out for things like that.
Yeah, you need to get every percent you can.
Of course, and it's tech cards are a really perhaps underexplored place where you can get those percents. I think we're seeing it now so much because the deck diversity has brought like this really interesting breed of deck where there's several different viable strategies in each class, but they're almost a continuum. You know, the Murloc Paladin to mid-range Paladin is one of them, and then mid-range to Control is another. And you can exist at each of these points, or you can exist somewhere in between them.
Yeah.
And where you exist on those spectrums between those six, or even really like Burn Mage and you know, maybe Freeze Mage taking a Blizzard, or throwing a counter spell, you know, from Secret Mage. Like, where you exist in these spectrums is a tech choice in itself. So I think that that's something pretty interesting, and another way to think about this is that maybe you don't want to change decks entirely, you just want to reshape your deck a tiny bit to look a little bit more like a different one. Yeah,
like the counterspell idea I think is a really good example. I've definitely seen that. I'm playing against Burn Mage, you play a Medivh, you know, and a Meteor, and a Firelands Portal, and then at some point I get countered by a main deck counterspell. And I think that is, you know, looking at what am I going to play against, what's good, what's bad, what is good about this other mage deck. It's got this card that is good in all these matchups, but I don't want to play that deck. I can still use that card that's good in those matchups.
Right.
And I can sort of, like, if I'm at the blue end of the spectrum, or the violet end of the spectrum there, the red end of the spectrum, I can sort of change my hue a little bit.
Right.
You can tweak your hue by small fractions, and really there's so many places you can land. In addition to just playing cards that are completely unexpected and nobody's playing.
Yeah.
Which also can be valuable, but like we have been talking about, is much more likely you'll make that decision accurately with a deck and class you're experienced with.
Yeah, I think that's there's so much equity in making your opponents unable to predict what you're doing. I mean, that is one of the most powerful things you can do. It's just often unexplored because brewing is typically punished very hard in this type of game, because playing an unoptimized deck against optimized decks is just a great way to lose. So, but often just having a strategy that your opponent, you know, even if it's in the form of a tech card or something, having a strategy your opponent's not expecting is just really strong.
It could really get them.
I think so. I actually think that that's related to our next topic, and I think it'd be a good segue. So, we want to talk about something really general. So this is a concept that comes up in a lot of card games, and it's having a plan. So this is something that I want to give credit where credit's due. This is something that the people on Limited Resources, it's a Magic podcast, they talk about this all the time. This is
those people.
Oh, they're so good. Yeah, Marshall and LSV, those people. They're so they harp on this really often, and it is a really important concept, and it's another one of those hidden in plain sight concepts. So
it's it's roughly as important as knowing the rules. Approximately.
It's very true.
It's pretty important.
It's really easy to slip into a mode of playing this game and winning, but not doing it.
And there's also, it's funny, there's like some amount of also subconsciously learning the plan and doing it.
Yeah.
People definitely learn the plan of a deck, like Aggro Hunter, you know, Go Face.
Right.
That
of course,
plan,
yeah.
People figured it out. It's so much that it's a song. But going on instinct isn't right. That's not the right way to play Hearthstone, on instinct. Every time you make a decision, you want to think about it. And the main thing you got to compare your play to, besides the rules, is it helping my plan?
Yeah.
Or and relative to what's their plan, is it going to help my plan more than it helps their plan?
Yeah.
And sometimes the execution of your plan as the hunter in an individual plan, an individual turn, might actually be attacking their minion.
Totally, and
it often is. That's where it diverges from the instinct of Go Face, and you have to think about the concept of Go Face, and how do you actually achieve that, and where just following instinct doesn't get you what you need.
Totally. So, I mean, at its most basic formulation, what it means to have a plan, I guess, is to know the route that you're going to take from where you are to win the game. So this is something that you can be thinking about as early as you mulligan, and you often are. I mean, you're making your keep decisions on the basis of exactly that. But it's something that you should be evaluating, you know, every turn, every time you have the opportunity to make a play. You should be asking yourself why you're making the play. You know, it's so easy in Hearthstone to just play on curve, and you'll get a lot of opponents if you do that, especially on a good draw, and especially if you're playing an aggro deck. But
it does work.
It does. It works, and I think a lot of the reason those decks get so powerful at the pre-legend ranks, and you know at some of the legend ranks, is that they are fast, and oftentimes they're not that subtle. You kind of just go face, and like that's correct, you know, 80-90% of the time.
Yeah, the fact that you might be making the wrong decision matters less.
Oh yeah, because it comes up less. You come like a lot of the time you are attacking their face, and that's correct. So I think that this is something that it's something that should be constantly evaluated. Like one really simple way to implement this, and thinking about having a plan is something that if you want to get better at Hearthstone, you should always be doing. You should always be asking yourself and paying attention closely to your game and saying, what is my plan? And one simple way to start this is actually with your mulligan. A lot of people will read mulligan guides or look at stats, what's the key percent on this, and that's a great thing to do, and I would never discourage anybody from doing research on the deck they're playing, but
right.
When you are brewing, or maybe you're playing a deck that's really familiar to you, or you don't really need the mulligan guide, you kind of have an idea, but you feel like you disagree with it, you should ask yourself, what are my first few turns going to look like with this hand? Mm-hmm. You know, where is this going to leave me in 3 or 4 turns? Where is this going to leave me in 2 turns? What if my opponent plays this card? What if my opponent has Frostbolt? What if my opponent has Rockpool Hunter and Tidecaller?
And also, like how many turns is this game going to be? Because if it's definitely going to be a lot, then I don't need to think necessarily about how this card is going to affect the first 3 turns. Like if you are certain that the game is going to be long, keeping the Aya might be right. Like that's something that I do with Jade Druid sometimes. Is I'll just keep Aya Blackpaw, if I'm playing against like Priest, for example. Because I know that Aya is really annoying for a Priest to deal with, and I know that they're not going to play a bunch of pirates and kill me before I get to play her. So that's another part of it that you have to consider, is not just how relevant are these cards to the first few turns, but really it comes back to the plan, and their plan is it's your plan versus theirs, and if they have a really slow plan, you can mulligan completely differently. And I think that's also easy to overlook if you don't really closely ask yourself about your plan versus their plan.
Yeah, knowing when your 80 or 90% is in that 10 or 20% category often boils down to trying to simulate the play and take a gander at what your opponent's best counterplays are and then see how they stack up against each other. I mean, you know, there's tons of times where it's correct to hold your 1-drop against their N'Zoth's First Mate, but, you know, you need to know when those situations come up. So another really important part of having a plan is understanding how the cards in your deck will interact with the cards in your opponent's deck, even if you haven't drawn or played them. So this is kind of related, again, to like that 80 or 90%, you know, those times where it's often correct to do something, but sometimes it's incorrect to do that thing. So
yeah, the non-obvious one.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of the time when you're playing Token Druid, you often just want to jam the living mana pretty early. I mean, sometimes getting it out on 5 and just getting 5 additional 2/2s is really great, and that can push the end of the game. But a lot more often against reactive classes like Mage, you want to wait until they commit some kind of board clear, or they commit some kind of spells before you play living mana, or
yeah,
wait.
You don't want to play it adjacent to your other guys to then give them more value when they play that volcanic potion.
Totally, and you will need a way to refill. But
Which living mana is devastatingly good at.
Oh yeah,
which is why that deck is so strong.
But related to that, you need to know if the board that you have down on the ground is good enough for your opponent to spend their cards on. Because they're not just going to blow Volcanic Potion or Blizzard or Flame Strike on any board. So sometimes you have to slowly add more power to the board and maybe draw out the game a little bit just to protect your spell, just to protect your living mana. So, you maybe play a Firefly or two, is this enough? And then you play another one, is this enough? And at some point they might just not have it, but then you have a board that's clear to go and win the game, right? And if they eventually draw it and use it, then you'll have the living mana as a backup. And knowing what your opponent has, in their deck and what they might have in their hand and when they might want to play it is going to tell you that you shouldn't play this card and you should hold it. And it might even be correct in that game to not play it because you will just win without playing it. But it's important to know that.
Yeah, the alternative situations, maybe you're playing against a deck that you think might have a way to clear your guys. So they might have a way to clear your guys, but it's extremely likely that if you don't play this living mana and get that damage out, you're going to lose.
Right.
And that's a different scenario if you're playing against like a hunter, for instance, and they got you really low pretty fast already. Even if there's a chance that they have Unleash the Hounds and it just beats you because you just played living mana, it might still be the right play because the only way you're winning that game is by getting the damage on the board. And for the most part, if you know what's in the Hunter's deck, you know that they're not really playing Explosive Trap anymore. It's really just Unleash the Hounds that would be able to do something there. That the odds are in your favor for just jamming.
Yeah, it's there's another point that's often brought up. Sometimes people can play around cards too much. That's sort of the, once you get into this mode of having a plan and understanding that your opponent has a game plan and they will also play cards to deal with the cards that you play with, surprise, you can get into this spot where you are so afraid of Frostbolt that you just don't play your 2-drop, or you're so afraid of Vaporize or something that you don't attack. And that's obviously bad too. You need to accept that there is going to be risk to all of your plays, but also, in the really critical spots where it comes down to, the last couple turns of the game, sometimes there are cards that will beat you no matter what you do, and you just have to pretend that your opponent doesn't have them.
Yeah, like Unleash the Hounds.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's why I brought it up.
Playing around it, it would just be wrong. What are you talking about? That it's only maybe 1 or 2 copies of it in his whole deck. You just have to go for it. But if you overthink it, sometimes you blow up that the 10%. Sometimes you think too hard, and you that's how you outplay yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you maybe have a 2-3 on board and they're at 14 and you're at 10, and you're not going to go the distance. They're going to beat you. You need to build that board. And if they have Unleash the Hounds and they win the game, that's fine. You go to the next one. But if you don't play Living Mana in that case, you're probably just going to lose. And your 2-3 is probably not going to get there.
You got to know when you have to risk it. Risk it for the biscuit.
Oh, yeah.
A similar situation might be if you're playing Mage against a Paladin. You might be able to do sort of a safe play, but things are really looking bad for you, and you really don't have any way of recovering from their board. Or you can play some fireballs to the face this turn, and if they don't heal themselves, you can finish them off exactly next turn. But if they have any heal, then there's no winning. That's probably the right play anyway.
Right.
That's probably still the right play. It's much, even if it's somewhat likely that a Paladin would have just any heal card. They do have a few. Some decks use Ivory Knights. It's not just the 2 Unleash the Hounds like the Hunter, but still, if you have enough experience with the deck, you can determine, this guy taromed way too hard, and I have no Flame Strikes or anything in my deck. I have no way of recovering from this. I just have to hope he doesn't have it.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and that's another that's related to another concept of playing to win. You know, in that case where you're facing down a really scary board that's threatening to kill you, pointing that fireball at a minion is natural. That's what your instincts tell you to do. There are things on the board that are killing me. Let me kill them instead, and I won't die. But you still might just lose if you don't have that fireball. You might not be able to assemble a winning board or, you know, a winning hand through all the stuff they have on board. Sometimes you need to sling at face and hope you draw the other one.
It's what we talked about this whole time. You got to check yourself. What's my plan?
Right.
What's the plan? What's the plan that wins? How do I get from this moment I'm living right now to me being excited about winning and then having crushed this guy? And if you just go on instinct and like, oh, there's a guy with 6 health and I fireball it, you can miss opportunities to, you know, be celebrating.
Yeah, totally. It's important to take those risks. I mean, sometimes you're not in a good spot and you're not likely to win the game. You know, it's never correct to concede there. That's obviously the lowest value play in terms of that particular game. Maybe not over your long-term, you know, win rate over time or whatever. But you know, sometimes it's correct to make a non-intuitive play. I mean, if you are playing mage and it's turn 5 or 6 and your opponent has a threat on board and you just have a handful of burn, maybe you can lethal them. Maybe over the next several turns, you can play on-curve burn spells and reduce their life total to 0. Totally non-intuitive. You're usually not playing burn on curve, and it's usually incorrect to do that. But maybe you have the 1 in a million hand that can do it.
And you only hurt yourself by not considering those situations.
Yeah, definitely.
It could be like the finals of, you know, the World Series of Hearthstone or whatever they do. The Super Hearthstone Bowl. And you might have that hand, and you don't want to miss it then, and you don't want to miss it climbing either.
Right.
And you're less likely to miss it then if you start looking for it now. Yeah, that's definitely easy to miss. Is something that looks like it's so low card value, like it's like you're literally wasting cards when the first things you learn to do is not do that.
Yeah.
And now you must unlearn that. And I think part of that is like question everything, or at least if you have the time, try to frequently question why you're making plays that you're making.
Yeah, totally. So it's very important to always be aware of why you're making, you know, to always know why you do something. If you make a play, you should be able to answer, you know, why did I make that play? What did I do? How does that advance my game plan? How does that thwart my opponent's game plan? And as you just do this more, it's something you have to think a lot about when you're playing. It's not just something that you'll play games and get good at. You need to actually actively try to do it. But eventually it'll become a lot less effortful. And you'll know to hold back your 2-1 against a warrior that mulliganed the leftmost card in their hand. You know, you'll know to do these things. These are it comes with practice.
And you also want to consider like maybe not just being able to answer why is the play I did the right play, but also think about maybe like before you make a play, think about everything you could do with the Frostbolt. Like they have the 4/3, and it seems like, oh, you just Frostbolt it, but maybe that's the right time to think about, wait, do I have the burn hand? Like once again, it's so counterintuitive. But it's part of just being critical and questioning yourself and sort of almost being creative and imaginative. Like, what if I play, you know, this on this? Just stopping and thinking about that sometimes is going to help you find really great plays that you might have missed. For example, what if I fireball my own guy? Sounds bad unless, like, the only way to win is to, like, dirty rat out their Doomsayer and play Sylvanas and fireball your Sylvanas or something. I don't know. It's something ridiculous with Doomsayer and Sylvanas. You know, you might not notice that unless you're like, oh, I wonder what happened if I just killed my own guy. Like, wait a minute. No, like, you could discover something really spicy. I'm not suggesting you're always going to find a secret way to wipe your opponent's board, but you might.
Yeah, I mean, all lines are worth considering, and doing so and making an effort to do so will just make you a better player.
Pretty much guaranteed. That's a big part of getting better, I think.
I think so too. Yeah,
and one of the ways that almost everyone can sort of always get better at is more openly considering things and being ready to unlearn instincts.
Yeah, I think that's true of video games in general.
It's like a life journey.
Yeah, and life, pretty much everything. Just knowing your plan, knowing why you're doing a particular thing, you save a lot of time, at work or in Hearthstone. Just keep the good beats rolling.
Things are getting deep.
Oh yeah.
This last turn is turning deep into reality.
Maybe it's time for us to pull out of the caverns below.
we know if there's one thing I know, it's when to pull out.
All right, and that'll do it. That'll do it for episode 5. So
lock that one up.
Oh yeah. If you liked us there and you liked the content that we talked about today, the stuff we talked about, there's a lot of places on the internet that you can go to get more Last Turn. So the internet's a wonderful place. So you can find us on Twitter at LastTurnHS. You can find us on Facebook. We are facebook.com/LastTurnHS. You can also find us on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/LastTurn. You should probably change that to LastTurnHS. We can worry about that later. So you can also find our podcast on iTunes, most importantly, but you can find us on Google Play and Player FM, Pocket Cast, and Beyond Pod. You can also find our episodes uploaded to YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so we got some really snazzy stuff there. Please check us out. Listen to us while you're at work or while you're driving or while you're supposed to be doing something else. From the caverns below, because you're playing Crystal Rogue.
Of course.
Do you have anything more to add, Evan?
Nope. That's everything.
Great.
That's all there is. That's games. That's life. We got it covered.
Yes, we definitely touched on all the most important points today.
Always have a plan. Always question yourself, and always know when to pull out.
And enact your plan on the next turn.